Sometimes, life doesn't send miracles. It sends people. People who arrive quietly, at exactly the moment you've almost given up. The last time we were together, a black automobile stopped outside our little farmhouse. A well-dressed gentleman stepped out, holding a leather folder. He asked only one question. "Is Mr. James Brooks home?" At that moment, none of us knew. That stranger was carrying far more than paperwork. He was carrying hope. Father slowly walked onto the front porch. He still looked weak. The illness had taken weight from his face. Even standing for long periods left him exhausted. Yet he greeted the stranger with the same warm smile he'd always shown everyone. "Good afternoon. My name is James Brooks." The gentleman extended his hand. "My name is Richard Harrison. I've heard you're the finest carpenter in 3 counties. Father laughed softly. "I think someone exaggerated." Richard smiled. "I don't believe they did." He opened the leather folder. Inside were photographs, beautiful handcrafted furniture. Dining tables, rocking chairs, bookshelves, cabinets. "I own Harrison Home Furnishings in Wichita. We build custom furniture. I've spent months searching for someone who still builds everything by hand. My customers don't want factory furniture. They want craftsmanship. They told me to find James Brooks." Father looked surprised. "I haven't built much lately. My health." Richard gently interrupted. "I know. I also know your reputation. In business, skills matter, but character matters even more. And everyone I asked said exactly the same thing. They said if James Brooks gives you his word, you can take it to the bank." I watched Father's eyes. For the first time in months, I saw something I hadn't seen. Confidence. Not because someone offered him money, because someone still believed in him. Sometimes, being trusted can heal wounds medicine never touches. Richard continued. "I don't need a factory. I don't need hundreds of pieces. I need quality. Can you build 1 dining table each month?" "1. That's all." Father hesitated. "The doctor says I shouldn't overwork." Richard nodded. "Then don't. I'd rather wait for excellent work than rush ordinary work." Mother quietly stood beside Father. She squeezed his hand. I knew exactly what she was thinking. This wasn't just a job. This was dignity, a chance to earn, instead of merely surviving. Father looked toward me, then toward Mother. Finally, he smiled. "I'll do my best." Richard smiled even wider. "I was hoping you'd say that." Before leaving, Richard reached into his briefcase. He handed Father a small envelope. "What's this?" "An advance payment." Father immediately tried to hand it back. "I haven't earned it yet." Richard shook his head. "I know. But I trust you. Buy whatever materials you need. When the table is finished, we'll call it even." Father stood completely still. His hands trembled as he accepted the envelope. Not because of the money, because after months of feeling like a burden, someone had trusted him again. That evening, our little farmhouse felt different. Mother was humming while she cooked dinner. Father carefully cleaned his old woodworking tools since his illness. The workshop lights stayed on again. Not late. Just long enough to remind us hope had finally found its way home. Later that night, Father called me into the workshop. He placed an old chisel into my hands. "This belonged to my father. And one day, it'll belong to you." I looked confused. "But I'm not a carpenter." He smiled. "Maybe not. But whatever you become, remember this. A person's greatest work isn't made with their hands. It's made with their character." Those words would guide me for the rest of my life. Over the next few weeks, Father slowly began working again. Only a few hours each day. Daniel came after school to help sweep the workshop. I sanded wood. Mother organized supplies. For the first time in years, it felt like our little family wasn't fighting against life anymore. We were finally building something together. But just when happiness returned, life placed another test in front of us. One afternoon, Richard Harrison returned. This time, he wasn't smiling. He walked into the workshop, holding a newspaper in one hand, and said quietly, "James, I think someone is trying to steal your designs." At that moment, none of us realized our family's biggest challenge was only beginning. There are moments in life when your heart tells you something is wrong before your mind can understand it. The moment Mr. Harrison placed that newspaper on our workbench, I saw Father's smile disappear. He unfolded the paper slowly. There, in the center of the page, was a photograph of a handcrafted dining table. It looked exactly like Father's design, every curve, every carved leg, even the small maple leaf pattern Father had always carved beneath the tabletop. It was unmistakably his work. But underneath the picture, another name was printed. William Grayson Furniture Company. Father didn't say a word. He simply stared at the newspaper. Finally, he whispered, "That's my design." Mr. Harrison nodded. "I know. I recognized it the moment I saw it." Mother stepped closer. "How could this happen?" Mr. Harrison sighed. "I don't know, but someone has copied James's craftsmanship almost perfectly." Father folded the newspaper carefully. There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. "I've spent 30 years building furniture. I never imagined someone would steal the one thing that truly belonged to me." Hearing those words hurt more than I expected, because I knew my father wasn't talking about wood, he was talking about his life's work. The next morning, Father returned to his workshop before sunrise, not to build, to compare. He laid his original sketches across the workbench. Every drawing had dates, measurements, notes written in his own handwriting. Some of the pages were so old, the edges had turned yellow. Daniel stood beside me, quietly studying them. "I didn't know your father kept everything," I smiled. "He says memories fade, but paper remembers." Mr. Harrison arrived later that afternoon. He carefully examined every sketch, every carving pattern, every measurement. Finally, he looked at Father. "James, these aren't copies. These are originals. You can prove these designs are yours." Father nodded slowly. I never thought I'd have to. A few days later, Mr. Harrison invited Father to visit his furniture showroom in town. It was the first time Father had traveled that far since his illness. I begged Mother to let me come. To my surprise, she agreed. As we walked through the showroom, beautiful handcrafted furniture filled every corner. Then I saw it, the copied table. From a distance, it looked identical, but Father walked straight toward it. He gently ran his fingers beneath the edge, then smiled. "It's not mine." Mr. Harrison looked confused. "It looks exactly the same." Father shook his head. "No, they copied the design, but they couldn't copy the heart." He pointed beneath the table. "The joints are rushed. The wood wasn't aged properly. And look here." He touched one corner. "The grain runs the wrong direction. It'll crack within a few years." Mr. Harrison stared at him in amazement. "You noticed all that in seconds?" Father chuckled softly. "A craftsman always knows his own work." That evening, as we drove home, I asked Father, "Does it bother you?" He looked out the window for a long time, then answered quietly, "People can copy what your hands create, but they can never copy who you are." I never forgot those words. Years later, whenever someone took credit for my work, I remembered Father's voice. And instead of becoming bitter, I chose to become better. A week later, Mr. Harrison called again. His voice sounded urgent. "James, I've learned who's behind this." Father's face became serious. "Who is it?" There was a long pause. Then Mr. Harrison answered, "I think it's someone you know." The room became completely silent. Father slowly lowered the telephone. Mother looked worried. "Who?" Father took a deep breath. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "My former apprentice, the young man Father had trained, the one he had treated like family, the one he had trusted with every tool in the workshop." None of us could believe it. And deep inside, I realized something painful. Sometimes, the deepest betrayals don't come from strangers. They come from the people you helped the most. The following morning, Father unlocked the workshop early. He picked up his oldest carving chisel, looked at it for a long moment, then quietly said, "If he wants my designs, he'll have to look me in the eyes." At that very moment, a pickup truck pulled into our driveway. A young man stepped out. He removed his hat and slowly walked toward the workshop. It was Father's former apprentice. He had come not to apologize, but to make an offer that would test everything my father believed in. There is an old saying my father loved: "Talent can be taught, character cannot." I didn't fully understand those words until the day his former apprentice walked back into our lives. The young man stepped out of the pickup truck. His name was Thomas Miller. He looked to be in his early 30s, well-dressed, confident, driving a truck far nicer than anything we'd ever owned. He removed his hat as he approached the workshop. For a brief moment, I thought he had come to apologize. I couldn't have been more wrong. Father looked up from his workbench. "Hello, Thomas." Thomas forced a smile. "It's been a long time, Mr. Brooks." Father nodded politely. It has. There was an uncomfortable silence, then Thomas glanced around the workshop. I see you're building again, Father smiled. A little. As much as my health allows. Thomas slowly walked around the room, running his fingers over Father's tools. The same tools Father had once taught him to use. Finally, he stopped beside the dining table Father had nearly finished. It's beautiful. Father simply replied, Thank you. Thomas reached into his leather briefcase. He placed a contract on the workbench. I've started my own furniture company. It's growing faster than I expected. I'd like to buy all your designs. The room became silent. Mother looked at Father. Daniel looked at me. No one spoke. Thomas continued, I'll pay you more money than you've ever made. You don't have to work anymore. Just sign the papers. Father didn't even touch the contract. Instead, he calmly asked, Why would you need my designs? Thomas smiled. Business is business. People love your style. And honestly, they don't care who designed it. Those words hit harder than a slap. I saw Father's shoulders sink, not because of the offer, because of the disrespect. Father looked directly into Thomas's eyes. When you first came here, you didn't even know how to hold a chisel. I taught you. I trusted you. I treated you like family. Thomas crossed his arms. And I learned. That's what apprentices do. Father nodded slowly. Yes, they learn. They don't steal. Thomas's smile disappeared. I'm not stealing. I'm making you a business offer. Father gently pushed the contract back across the table. My answer is no. Thomas frowned. You haven't even looked at the amount. I don't need to. There are some things. You don't sell. Thomas's voice became colder. You really think people still care who built a table? Father answered without hesitation. No, but I care. And when I leave this world, I want my grandchildren to remember that I earned every piece honestly. The workshop fell completely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to stop singing. Thomas picked up the contract. You'll regret this. Father smiled gently. I've regretted many things. Teaching you isn't one of them. Thomas looked surprised. Father continued, because I still believe. Every person gets to choose who they become. You've made your choice. I'll keep making mine. Without another word, Thomas walked out. His truck disappeared down the dusty road. I stood beside Father. Weren't you afraid? He looked at me with a peaceful smile. Of what? Losing the money. Father chuckled softly. Eleanor, if money costs you your name, it's far too expensive. That evening, Mr. Harrison returned. After hearing everything, he shook Father's hand firmly. James, I've met hundreds of craftsmen, but today, I met a man of true character. Then he reached into his briefcase once more. This time, he placed 3 new contracts on the table. I've shown your work to my biggest clients. They don't want copies. They want the original. Father stared at the papers in disbelief. 3 custom orders? Mr. Harrison smiled. No. He turned another page. There are 12. Mother covered her mouth in shock. Daniel laughed out loud. For the first time in years, Father's workshop was completely full of hope. Over the next several months, our little workshop came back to life. The sound of saws echoed through the valley. Fresh-cut oak filled the air. Neighbors stopped by just to wave. Father smiled more. Mother laughed more. And every afternoon after school, Daniel and I hurried to the workshop to help however we could. Life wasn't perfect, but it was finally moving forward. Looking back now, I realized something important. Success doesn't always arrive because you're the smartest or the strongest. Sometimes, it arrives because you refuse to become someone you weren't. That lesson shaped my entire life. And one day, it would save me from making the biggest mistake of all. Because just as everything seemed peaceful again, a letter arrived in our mailbox. It wasn't addressed to Father, it wasn't addressed to Mother, it was addressed to me. Inside was an invitation that would take me away from my little hometown and force me to choose between the family I loved and the future I had always dreamed about. My hands trembled as I opened it. I had no idea that one letter would change the course of my life forever. And that, my dear grandchildren, is where our next chapter begins. End of episode 4.